everyone, and welcome to the first episode of White Collar Coffee Conversations. As forensic accountants who work with attorneys and investigators on cases related to financial fraud, complex commercial litigation, valuation and damages, and many other issues, we're putting together brief interviews with leaders across the financial and legal world to provide you with insights on our work and a look at the trends going forward. I'm Chris Ekemoff, a CPA with experience in fraud investigations, Ponzi schemes, and white-collar cases.
And I'm Becky O'Malley. I'm a certified fraud examiner with experience in internal investigations as well as fraud examinations.
Our first conversation today is focused on a very timely topic, the pandemic and its current and lasting impact on the legal profession. And we've got two great guests to discuss with that today.
All right, we're excited to have our first episode showcasing two practicing attorneys with experience on both sides of the aisle as former prosecutors and now defense attorneys. I'll start with you, Brandon. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you give us a brief background on your career?
Sure. First of all, thanks, Chris and Becky, for having us on your show. I know that it can only go uphill from here, so it will be great from here on out. So anyway, I'm Brandon Fox. I am the managing partner of Jenner & Block's Los Angeles office. Before rejoining the firm, I ran the criminal division of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Los Angeles, and I handled trials, investigations, white-collar matters.
We've also got my good friend Adam Ruther with us. Adam, tell us about your experience.
So my name's Adam Ruther. I'm a partner at the mid-size Baltimore-based law firm of Rosenberg, Martin, Greenberg. I'm sort of like the stateside version of Brandon. I was a prosecutor in the state's attorney's offices in Montgomery County outside of Washington, D.C., and then in Baltimore City for a total of 7.5 years before I came here to Rosenberg, Martin, where I do primarily white-collar criminal defense and investigations work.
Well, thank you, Adam. Well, let's just jump right in. So over the past 18 months, we've seen courtrooms close and reopen, investigations being conducted remotely, legal and even congressional testimony given through Zoom, and a variety of other logistical and systemic changes that have clearly impacted the way law is practiced. Brandon, I'll start with you. Which of these disruptions do you think will last beyond the potential return to the normal way of doing things?
Becky, it's interesting using the word disruption because I think some of them might be categorized as disruptions, like the changes in the courts and the backlog of cases. I would call that disruptions. But I think there are a lot of things that I would say a little bit differently, that they are improvements to how we're practicing. I think that now we can deal with our clients across the globe without having to fly out there, which is better for the quality of life of lawyers. We don't necessarily have to go into courtrooms all the time, although key court appearances we obviously would like to. We can do that remotely as well. And even doing investigations remotely, except for key witnesses, or if the client obviously wants something differently, a lot of those can be done remotely too. So I think that some of those things will stay. Depositions certainly, I believe, will a lot of them will stay that way as well, except for key depositions.
All right, thank you, Brandon. And Adam, and what about you? What do you think will be the lasting impact of the new way of doing things?
So I totally agree with Brandon. There's a lot of silver lining to this cloud, surprisingly enough. I think that being able to do this and have everyone a lot more comfortable with it as opposed to it being sort of a technological fringe is going to be a real benefit, and it's going to be a real benefit to our clients. My only concern, and it may not be a terribly well-founded one, but I saw it in some cases that got pushed to just the brink of trial that I was dealing with while the pandemic was sort of winding down, or we thought it was this past spring. My only concern is that the courts may have gotten a little bit too comfortable with the idea of this being an acceptable analog or stand-in for live testimony. When it comes to trial work, I hope that we haven't gotten so comfortable with this, because I think there is something that's lost in the translation, and particularly when you're in front of a jury, you want that testimony to be live and the cross-examination to be live as well. Aside from that, I agree. I think it's opened a whole new world and a whole new way to practice.
Well, besides the impact of COVID-19 on our daily lives, 2021 has brought about a change that we might be more used to, that of one of a presidential administration. The Biden team has been in office for around 9 months at this point, and I know that changing policies and focuses between administrations can sometimes be confusing or muddy the waters for law enforcement regarding their priority objectives or even just the load of cases that they're dealing with. Brandon, starting with you, how do you feel the new administration is doing regarding these challenges?
Well, we're still waiting to see what the big policy changes are going to be. That's both globally and locally, because there currently have not been any U.S. attorneys that have been confirmed to their local offices. So we don't know how it's going to change. I think that there are additional complications as well with where we are. And that is the pandemic caused the courtrooms to be shut down in many jurisdictions for a long time. And that means that there's a backlog, and instead of having a lot of charges, they're going to have to clean up that mess first and clean up that backlog first before they can move on to their big policy objectives. And then we've also seen a rise in certain types of violent crime, a 30% rise in murder over in 2020, which means that even if the Biden administration wanted to focus on things besides violent crime, they're going to have to put a lot of emphasis on their violent crime work to combat that before they can move on to bigger things.
Adam, from your viewpoint, how do you think about the administration and its conduct to date?
So we're in a similar position. We have a new U.S. attorney, but he is also, as Brandon pointed out, not confirmed yet. And what we're expecting to see, even by his appointment, he's somebody who's focused a great deal on at least the concept of going after white-collar offenders more than we'd seen in the last administration, and public corruption. That being said, we also in Baltimore particularly have a significant violent crime problem, and the U.S. Attorney's Office has been a very valuable tool in fighting that. So we are expecting to see, yes, a lot of work in cleaning up the backlog of violent crimes, particularly trying to get a lot of cases done where the defendants have been incarcerated pending their trials. But we're also expecting, and it's particularly relevant to the white-collar practices that we're focusing on, we are expecting an uptick in the investigations and into white-collar cases and public corruption, which, of course, we all welcome the work.
All right, well, switching gears a little bit. So there's no doubt the last 18 months have been pretty tough for all of us, but I am optimistic that we were clearly on the way of getting back to the normal way of doing things. So on that note, Adam, are there any uplifting observations that you've made about the legal environment in its handling of all of the crises of 20 and 21?
So in addition to the sort of the dynamic way that our profession has dealt with all this, as we mentioned earlier, getting comfortable with the technology, being able to go over long distances without getting on an airplane, that sort of thing, that's all been very helpful, and we all agree that's definitely a silver lining. On a more sort of philosophical front, I will say with the courts, one thing that I noticed going through the pandemic is there's been sort of an attention that wasn't there before to the human aspect of COVID and what we went through. Particularly, the best example of this I can think of is the focus on compassionate release cases. Cases that, compassionate release sort of used to be this sort of fringe thing that didn't get used an awful lot. And now that we had the pandemic, we saw an enormous uptick in cases that succeeded on compassionate release. And I think that maybe that's opened up particularly a lot of the judiciary's eyes to the idea that there is a human aspect. There is something to be looked at in terms of whether, particularly with incarceration specifically, whether there is a true necessity to keep certain people incarcerated when things like serious illness happen, when things like taking care of family members who have maybe become infirmed happen. I think the courts are more open to that idea now than they used to be, having the big picture perspective of sometimes there are more serious things going on. And I hope that will continue. I hope that perspective will hang around.
Okay. And Brandon, what gives you hope going forward after such a long period of uncertainty?
I think that a lot of people, both individually and also organizations, have been focusing on what matters. And I've spoken to a lot of attorneys during this time that have realized that it was much better to spend time at home and not be traveling all the time and really focus on that family time. And I think figuring out where you are in your career and what you want to be doing is something that is important for all of us to do, whether it's associates making sure that where they're at is the firm they want to be at and one that cares about the values that for example, we care about. We care about diversity and inclusion and our associates' well-being. And being at a place like that is important for everybody. So I think not only the pandemic, but some of the things coming out of the George Floyd murder and other things that happened last year, just again, a focus on the values and what is important to you.
I think that's a great place to sum it up, and glad to hear there's some hope from the legal profession going forward. Thank you, Brandon and Adam, both of you, for your insights and candor today on the White Collar Coffee Conversations, Episode 1. Hopefully, Brandon, you're right, only up from here. We look forward to having either of you back on at sometime in the future, and we want to thank our viewers and listeners out there for your interest. in this podcast and in this video series. So if you've got a topic you'd like to hear us discuss in the future, please reach out to Becky or I on LinkedIn to get connected.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Until next time.
Have a great day, everybody.